The night air was thick with tension as soldiers dragged Jesus through the narrow streets of Jerusalem. His hands bound, his face already bearing the marks of violence, the man who had healed the sick and fed the hungry was now a prisoner. But this was just the beginning of a night that would change everything. They brought him first to Annas, the former high priest, then to Caiaphas, where the religious leaders had already gathered like vultures, circling their prey. The Sanhedrin, the highest court in Israel, had assembled in the dead of night, something that violated their own laws. But they were desperate. This Jesus had become too popular, too dangerous to their carefully constructed power structure. Witness after witness stepped forward, each one telling a different story. One claimed Jesus had threatened to destroy the temple. Another said he had forbidden paying taxes to Caesar. Their testimonies contradicted each other so blatantly that even in their kangaroo court, the lies fell apart. The religious leaders grew frustrated, their carefully planned case crumbling before their eyes. Then something remarkable happened. Jesus, who had spent 3 years teaching crowds, healing the broken, and debating the learned, simply remained silent. He stood there, bloodied but dignified, saying nothing as lie after lie was hurled at him. His silence was more powerful than any defense he could have offered. Finally, Caiaphas, the high priest, stood up. His voice echoed through the chamber as he demanded, "I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." The room fell silent. This was the moment everything hinged on. Jesus could have denied it, could have found some clever way to avoid the question. Instead, he looked directly at Caiaphas and said, "You have said so. But I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Caiaphas tore his robes, a dramatic gesture that was supposed to show his horror at what he claimed was blasphemy. "He has uttered blasphemy," he shouted. "What further witnesses do we need? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your judgment?" The verdict came swift and unanimous. He deserves death. But there was a problem. Under Roman occupation, the Jewish authorities couldn't execute anyone. They needed Roman approval, which meant they needed Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. So as dawn broke over Jerusalem, they dragged Jesus to the Praetorium, Pilate's headquarters. Pilate was no fool. He could see through their religious jealousy immediately. When he questioned Jesus privately, he found no evidence of any crime against Rome. He asked, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus replied, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest." Pilate was intrigued, even impressed. Here was a man facing death who spoke with calm authority about kingdoms beyond earthly power. 3 times Pilate declared Jesus innocent. 3 times he tried to release him. He even offered the crowd a choice: free Jesus or free Barabbas, a known murderer and insurrectionist. Surely they would choose the innocent teacher over the violent criminal. But the religious leaders had worked the crowd into a frenzy. "Crucify him! Crucify him!" they chanted. When Pilate asked what crime Jesus had committed, they only shouted louder. Pilate's wife had even sent him a message, warning him to have nothing to do with that righteous man, because she had suffered terribly in a dream about him. But political pressure won out over justice. Pilate literally washed his hands before the crowd, declaring himself innocent of Jesus' blood, then handed him over to be crucified. The Roman soldiers took Jesus into the Praetorium and called together the entire battalion. What happened next was a mockery that revealed the depths of human cruelty. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on his shoulders. They twisted together a crown of thorns and pressed it onto his head, the sharp spikes drawing blood. They put a reed in his right hand as a mock scepter, then knelt before him in fake worship, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews." Then they spat on him and struck him repeatedly with the reed. After they had finished their cruel game, they put his own clothes back on him and led him out to be crucified. Jesus, already weakened by the beating and loss of blood, struggled under the weight of the heavy wooden crossbeam. The soldiers forced a man named Simon of Cyrene to carry it for him. The procession made its way through the streets of Jerusalem to Golgotha, which means place of the skull. It was a hill outside the city walls where Rome displayed its power through public executions. A crowd followed, including women who wept for Jesus. Even in his agony, he turned to them and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children." At Golgotha, they offered Jesus wine mixed with myrrh, a crude painkiller. He tasted it, but refused to drink. Then came the crucifixion itself, a method of execution so brutal that Roman citizens were exempt from it. They nailed his hands and feet to the cross and raised it up between two criminals, one on his right and one on his left. Above his head they placed a sign that read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews," written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. As Jesus hung there, his first words were not of anger or despair, but of forgiveness. "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Even as he suffered the most agonizing death imaginable, his heart was filled with mercy for his executioners. The soldiers divided his clothes among themselves, casting lots for his seamless tunic. The religious leaders mocked him, saying, "He saved others, let him save himself if he is God's Messiah, the chosen one." Even one of the criminals crucified beside him joined in the mockery. But the other criminal rebuked his companion and asked Jesus to remember him when he came into his kingdom. Jesus promised him, "Today you will be with me in paradise." From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness covered the whole land. It was as if creation itself was mourning. Then Jesus cried out in a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The opening words of Psalm 22, a psalm that begins in despair but ends in triumph. Some who heard thought he was calling for Elijah. As the hours passed, Jesus said, "I am thirsty." Someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a stick, and offered it to him. After receiving the drink, Jesus said, "It is finished." With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. At that moment, the earth shook violently. The curtain in the temple, the massive veil that separated the Holy of Holies from the rest of the temple, was torn in two from top to bottom. Tombs broke open, and many holy people who had died were raised to life. The centurion who had overseen the crucifixion, a hardened Roman soldier who had witnessed countless executions, was so moved by what he had seen that he declared, "Surely this man was the Son of God." As evening approached, a wealthy man named Joseph of Arimathea, who was secretly a disciple of Jesus, went to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. With Pilate's permission, he took the body down from the cross. Nicodemus, another secret follower, brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes weighing about 75 pounds. Together, they wrapped Jesus' body in linen cloths with the spices, according to Jewish burial customs. In the garden near Golgotha, there was a new tomb where no one had ever been laid. Because it was the Jewish day of preparation and the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, watched where he was laid. Then a large stone was rolled across the entrance, sealing the tomb. To everyone watching, it seemed like the end. The man who had claimed to be the Son of God was dead, buried in a borrowed tomb. His disciples had scattered in fear. His movement appeared crushed. The religious leaders breathed a sigh of relief. Rome had demonstrated its power once again. But as the sun set on that Friday evening, as the Sabbath began and Jerusalem grew quiet, something extraordinary was about to unfold. The God who had spoken light into darkness, who had breathed life into dust, who had made promises to Abraham and David and the prophets, this God was not finished. The story that seemed to end in a tomb was actually just beginning its most incredible chapter. Death itself was about to discover that it had no power over the author